I am a farmer in the UK, based in Dorset, and I started, from a non-farming background. Well, my family, previous generation had been farmers and peasant farmers, but I grew up in the United States as because my parents migrated over there, and my husband and I, we got a piece of land and had to teach ourselves how to farm because we wanted to have a small holding and a farm. So it was very much, we kind of started from scratch and tried to do that just because we felt like we wanted to raise our family doing something that was quite positive, have a job that was positive. We knew a lot of people that were environmental protesters, doing things like protesting against the building of roads or nuclear power, or just all different sorts of range of issues. But that kind of protesting can actually be really draining, and the idea of doing something really positive that was an alternative, that you could have a livelihood that was actually really regenerating the earth rather than draining it, felt very compelling. And I also felt very strongly about raising my kids in a way that they were able to eat fresh food. We really had very little income when we started because I wasn't able to receive any benefits, and my husband really couldn't find a job. When we moved here to England, because I was a migrant, we it was a way that we could actually afford organic food for our children, which has actually become a very niche luxury kind of products in the UK here. And so it was a real struggle, but it was also really empowering to be able to try and do something positive. And we had to work very, very hard to get planning permission on our land because we built our house, but it was illegal, and we faced eviction for several years, and things like that. So, that experience of doing that really informed the activism that I try and do now, because through doing that, I kind of met a lot of other people trying to do the same thing. And, at that time, I wasn't really connected with a lot of the global movements of other things going on, other than having visited India and worked with communities there before, because my father sent me over when I was in university. But, when we met other people trying to do it, we realized there was actually a need to try and push for some structural change, because all the things that were actually the barriers that we were facing that made it quite difficult, or the majority of them, were because the system wasn't designed to make it something that would work for us. There was huge structural issues that had to do with land justice, and the fact that a lot of land is owned by very wealthy people. Getting access to land is very difficult if don't have inherited wealth and the knowledge and skills. There's very little government support for that. There's a huge range of government policy that actually said to farmers here, you need to either get big and get technological or get out of the industry. Really like kind of trying to push towards consolidation. That is in the wider framework of trade agreements that really look at globalization and how important a supermarket consolidation of the food system is, and all of that, which puts you on a really unlevel playing field if you're trying to make beautiful handmade food and get a fair price for it to generate a livelihood for your family. So it makes it very difficult, because you end up having to sell things at fancy farmers markets for really expensive prices, because you also need to buy your kids' school uniforms and things like that at the same time. So all those things, kind of showed that like we were trying to do something very grassroots, because like the reality is that with social change, that change has to be on the ground, literally from the soil up, right? It has to happen on the ground. That is what needs to change. But that change is really hampered or can be accelerated by what's happening on the wider structural level, what's happening with policy, and what's happening with the really big picture of things. And that's where those power dynamics that are controlling the world system are really, really difficult to operate outside of, and if you try to build your own grassroots example without approaching that wider structural change, is actually a recipe for real burnout. And it also means that it's very, very difficult to really broaden that, to put it on a wider scale, because you see that within organic farming, the move towards regenerative farming and agroecology and things, that actually a lot of the people that can enter into that are the people who can afford to buy land, who can afford to get the resource to do it. And then they might end up gearing towards niche high-end products rather than things that are accessible to every person in society. And there's a basic, as far as I'm concerned, there's a basic human right for everybody to be able to afford good quality, healthy, accessible, pesticide-free food. But the structural changes that need to be made in order to enable that mean that we have to hold government to account to be able to take the right to food seriously. Like if you're looking in the bigger picture, governments are empowered by society, by all the citizens that have made a social contract with governments to be able to provide for basic provision of our human rights. And food is one of those most essential basic human rights. And the duty is not just to go and provide free food. It's about having the right set of policies that enable access to land, to seed, to water, to food that's at an affordable price, that's an accessible location within your community, and all those different things. And that's about policy change. And so, those two things have to work together. When I really experienced this and met other people doing that, we decided we needed to form a union, which a union is, meant to be there to speak up for and advocate the rights of workers within a certain sector. We wanted to form a union to support the rights of small-scale farmers, and also to look at those wider issues of food sovereignty and the right to food, and to really fight for that in the UK, because there wasn't an organization that was existing that could do that. And then we joined in with a really broad social movement called La Via Campesina, which is a network of social movements all across the world. In every continent, pretty much, we have organizations which are members of La Via Campesina. Altogether, we have a membership of about 300 million small scale and peasant farmers. That includes indigenous people, who are kind of people who are very ecosystem connected, live closer to the natural environment and needing the natural environment in order to provide for a lot of basic resources, particularly food for their local communities, and really fight for food sovereignty. That means having control and access to resources to be able to do that, to look at providing local food for their families and their communities and sell through local supply chains and that kind of thing. And within that movement, we have a philosophy that we want people to be advocating for themselves, to be able to be empowered within the movement to advocate for themselves. It's not paid lobbyists that go forward and try and advocate for this change. That we do have paid lobbyists within the movement, and I'm paid now to work. And I work with the UK government all the time with the agriculture department, talking to ministers. Tomorrow morning, I've got a thing meeting with George Eustace, who's the farming minister in England, to try and talk about different things on farming policy. I do that, but it's the policy that you first have to be on the ground. You have to be somehow hands in the soil doing that. But then also, even if you're not a paid member of staff within the organization, we have a lot of political training and ways to try and engage the membership to think about how they can approach policymakers, but also do other things that are grassroots solutions that can actually create change, like forming cooperatives, community food hubs, community-based projects like kitchens and food aid programs that actually empower the community to create a solution for themselves, those kinds of things. So it works on all those levels, because once you start to get those examples and then you can amplify them through enabling people to speak on a political level, that's how those elements work together, if you see what I mean. And you actually need both, because you cannot leverage change on a policy level, and I've been doing this for many, many years now. You cannot leverage that change unless the politicians that you're talking to, or the civil servants that you're talking to, feel there's enough change in the hearts and minds of people in society to enact those policies. And so, the mobilizations, the networks, the grassroots projects, the visits to demonstration places, all those things are absolutely critical in making that wider change. And that wider change then enables more people to do it on a grassroots level. So they've got to work in synergy together.
Thanks, Jyoti. And how have you found it in terms of this? So this, to me, speaks to the yes and no that Isa was talking about in our first session, which is that you can't, if you're creating your own kind of almost alternative space and the government and policy framework doesn't enable it, it's going to crumble. But at the same time, if you're only working in the space of this isn't okay and this is okay, then you're not actually making the change that needs to happen on the ground. So how have you found that navigation? How have you decided where the balance works, and have you found a way in which that you can engage with both in a way that is synergistic, rather than constantly being in a cycle where you're battling in the government, which can sometimes happen. In my experience, just something was really bad and now it's less bad than it could have been because of
it always is. Yeah. They never fix the problem. That's true. You're usually just removing some really annoying barriers. Yeah I think I think the idea is that it's just, you're not trying to look to one individual to do all the different levels. It is the idea of a movement holding the different levels, and that you actually build those synergies within a movement so that you can play to people's strengths. You bring people together and you help people feel comfortable in a part of a picture that's so much bigger than themselves for being able to do it. So some people love getting out at a demonstration and feeling the crowd. They might want to feed everybody at the thing, or somebody might want to lead songs or paint beautiful. Other people may feel much more comfortable just hosting a visit to their farm and having a small group of other farmers themselves or new entrants who want to learn skills, or bringing politicians to their farms and letting them talk to them in a space where they feel very comfortable. And other people may be really comfortable in front of a really like high profile political conference or something like that. Other people might just want to click a button and send a letter to their MP. There's just different ways people feel comfortable, and it's enabling a good balance of those things. Also thinking about, like a little bit of strategy all along, thinking, okay, what is it we're really aiming for, and what's the right synergy of these various elements we can do to actually push certain key elements of that change, and thinking about it where you're sort of analyzing where gaps are, and if there are gaps in trying to really push things forward, building the strength of it through the movement, not ever thinking that you're one individual operating on your own. That is actually a real web, as Fatima was describing so beautifully.